Welcome, everybody, to Crossing the Line with Greg Heym. It says so right over here. Thanks for joining us.
Product placement.
Always. Hey, you know, if we sold these, maybe we'd make a pretty penny. Or we don't. They don't make them anymore. Nickel.
They are fantastic mugs.
You know, they don't leak. So there we go. That's the only promise we make.
Dishwasher safe?
Yeah, you know.
The first thing you told me. First thing you told me when I got the cup.
If we're gonna sell them, then we're gonna have to make them. Well, no need to introduce these gentlemen, but I will anyway. We have my attorney, the wonderful Shar Sedgh, who has an abbreviated name that I can't pronounce.
Rhymes with caviar, Shariar.
No, I can say Shariar Sedgh, but
There you
Shar
go.
Sedgh is impossible to say quickly. Me and Lena tried to do it one day for 10 minutes. We couldn't get it
My
done.
favorite joke is when someone struggles with my name, I say, don't worry, my parents can't get it straight either, and they
See?
named me.
There you go.
See, that's weird, but sure. He's the Sedgh in the Sedgh and Zuckerman,
Yes.
and it's always good to have an attorney here.
Thanks for having me.
I can get in a lot of trouble. And then we got the money man himself, lone daddy in the flesh, always looking tan, with great hair and trim. Scott Nadler, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, man? It's good to be back.
It is.
Yeah.
And show note, the next 2 weeks there will be no podcast.
We got to lay it all on the floor tonight.
I'm going
today.
to two ends of the spectrum. I have to go to Buffalo early next week to take my son to orientation.
We have sound effects now.
And then I have to fly to Florida, which is always lovely in July to visit my in-laws. So,
I may be there too, actually.
all right, well, we'll hang.
All right.
You pay.
I'll pay for the sunblock.
Well, it's funny because you're just waiting for that thunderstorm that happens in the early afternoon every day in Florida this time of year. Coming to you from Studio 1873. And I forgot to mention we have Ray and Lena here. It just goes to show you we never edit anything. But we'll give you more stuff to make fun of as soon as we return from these messages.
Your dream home is closer than you think. I'm Scott Nadler, VP of Mortgage Lending at CrossCountry Mortgage, and I'm here to get you the perfect loan to match your perfect home. From first-time home buyers to seasoned homeowners, I've helped clients make their moves with confidence. Ready for a smooth, stress-free home buying experience? Let's get you moving today. Call me and let's turn those dreams into keys.
Sedgh & Zuckerman is a boutique residential law firm guiding you and your clients every step of the way with a solution-oriented approach. Make sure to work with a deal maker and not a deal breaker. Contact us today at sznylaw.com.
And we're back. Always get a jolt saying that. All right, so one of the big stories last week was the jobs report. We're not going to give you every number, but it was better than expected. So we like that. The unemployment rate, Scott's like shaking his head. We got to tell you, Scott got burned on this report, and we'll tell you why in a minute.
Yeah, it's true.
So the ADP data comes out first, and that showed a loss of 33,000 private sector jobs. So everybody started to get a little panicky and said, oh my God, what is this going to show? Although a lot of people probably secretly rooting for weakness so we can get rate cuts.
I was just thinking the same thing.
And, as we said before, ADP and BLS, it's just 6 letters that never get along. They never match each other. BLS's 2 reports don't add up, although the household survey was sort of in line with the payroll survey. So we got all that, 147,000 jobs added. That all sounds pretty good. But then me, ruining the fun.
Wah, wah.
Attorneys aren't known to make things lighter in the room, so you can back me up on some of this. So, yes, we did add 147,000 jobs. But the largest industry that added jobs, government. It's like, Greg, I thought we were cutting the federal government. It was state and local, mostly educational, apparently. So, and then healthcare. So we say all the time why we don't like healthcare to be adding jobs, because it's government supported and it's not really dependent on the health of the economy. So 112,000 of the 147,000 jobs added in June were in government or healthcare. Most private sector industries were flat, up a little, down a little, nothing noteworthy. The unemployment rate fell. People expected it to tick up, it ticked down. Is it because of a jobs bonanza? No, it's really due to people leaving the labor force, or not as many people looking for work. The labor force participation rate went down. and that's not good. Wages were up decent levels, still rising much faster than inflation, so that's good. But here's the gotcha to Loan Daddy himself, who's always talking about revisions.
Oh boy.
April and May revised up, not down. But you see
A small amount,
right,
but
when
yes.
they revise them up, it's like this. When
Tiny.
they revise them down, it's like a crater.
Yep.
So how did you feel? Did you say, oh man, Greg's going to bust my chops about this?
That was my first thought.
should have been
when
the
I woke
first
up this morning. Look, we have initial claims and continuing claims that have been up. You have the ADP report that comes in, negative 33,000 jobs created.
But that's not so contradictory when you see that almost all the jobs are government
Yes.
or government supported.
Yep.
You know.
So it was just, if it weren't for the BLS numbers, where would rates be right now?
Well, we're going to go into where rates might be a little later in the podcast. Teaser
just
alert.
Every report, inflation, jobs have been coming in line or below expectations, which has been helping mortgage rates for a couple weeks now. And then this report comes out and it just puts a pause on everything that we've been seeing. And I was thinking about this on the way over. I have a friend, Talia. Shout out to
Hey, Talia.
Talia. She's definitely a big subscriber here.
Drop a like.
Yes, drop a like.
Well, if she'd like a tour of the studio, you know. we
She
can,
is welcome.
never come in.
Talia goes out with a guy, and first date goes really, really well, right? He's attractive.
It wasn't you, right?
It wasn't me.
Okay.
Very good values. They have good conversation. Everything is perfect.
Doesn't sound like Scott.
Then they start arguing over the BLS report versus you.
Second date, everything is perfect, right? So she starts thinking, this guy's great. Things are going very, very well. Third date comes. They go to a really expensive, nice place. The bill comes. He looks at the bill, and he looks at her and says, do you want to split this? So it was like everything was so great up until that moment where he went to her and said, do you want to split this bill? So I'm curious to get your opinion in a situation like that. And Lena, we could bring you in on this too. In that situation, because like the BLS report, everything is going so well, and then this report comes out and throws a wrench into it. So
Well,
for
it's funny,
her,
the check is a defining point. Like I dated a lot,
Yeah.
you know, back. You always knew. Like my wife,
That's
when
why I
we were
want your
dating,
opinion here.
never once reached for the check. Not once. Still doesn't
Not
do
even
it.
the token, please let
The
me
fake.
get that thing.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
not even
The fake
that.
turn.
Yeah.
And you know that's also though a good signal, and it's like she's comfortable with that, and because you can offend people.
Right.
Lena's nodding her head, and I think that's part of it, because if like that would seem like an innocent enough offer because he's not assuming anything, but it shows you on a third date how much you know about that person.
Right.
It's the third date.
Yeah.
You need to pick up the check.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I
Agreed.
agree.
Agreed.
So
that the deal?
what advice do we give her?
I gotta think about that.
Everything's going great.
Well, does this guy
It's
get
just
a
this
job?
this one moment.
Can he pay the check?
He has a job,
If he
although
can't pay the check, then
Yeah,
that's
although I don't know if he's in government or healthcare. So
Oh, yeah, well,
Might be a teacher or a doctor. But if you're a doctor, you should be picking up. If you're a teacher, maybe not.
that's a loopy Monday
I'll
here.
tell you what. My first date with my wife, we went to a Knicks game.
first date.
First date. Knicks
Wow.
game.
Did they win?
I couldn't do another dinner.
Courtside, right?
Do another sit. We're pretty close, but not quite there yet. We need rates to drop a little bit more. We can
Are
get
there Sedgh and
started.
Zuckerman courtside seats that we can get? There should be.
We could.
Nadler doesn't give me tickets to anything. Not
get them-
even Browns
I get them from
games.
them.
And your company sponsors the Browns.
We'll
but-
take a podcast trip out.
and then we figured maybe a just jumping straight into a Knicks game would be a little bit weird. We didn't know each other, so we stopped for some sushi first, and then after the Knicks game, it went so well. We stopped at a bar for a couple of drinks, and as I stepped to go to the restroom, my wife picked up the tab for the drinks at the end of the night.
That's
And I
love.
thought that
That's
was
love.
Amazing, right?
That's love.
It was amazing.
That's very sweet.
But my philosophy has always been a little old school. Let the gentleman take everything. Every so often, the girl can host either, like, let me buy tickets to a show and
Right.
I'll take this date. But I don't think you need to X this guy right away. I think you need to see if there's a trend.
You got to remember, this is an attorney talking.
Yeah.
You know, he's
No,
he's defending the guy now.
Listen, as a guy who also dated a lot, if you go 3 perfect dates, you
Yeah.
can't just knock them off because
Yeah,
of
he
one
gets
problem.
a strike. He
Yeah,
gets a
Gets a
exactly.
strike,
I
yeah.
definitely don't think it's the right move. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
and it has to be up to the woman to offer.
Yep.
If she wants to, she's like, no, I'll get this. Let me do this.
All right.
I'll
I
provide this
will
figure.
report
Exactly.
back and see how this.
Well, why
this-
do you have to report
this
back?
format-
She's a big fan of the show. She's going to see it.
That's
so what?
No. I'm saying I'm going to report back to the viewers how the fourth date goes, if there is a fourth date.
Now, can we get the table like next to them?
We could.
And we could bet on it.
Could this be their next
It's on
date?
Calcium right now.
Could this be- they should watch
Great.
this
Have
as their
him,
next
have him
date.
right here.
I think the problem is like if you don't want to assume anything about anybody, you know, and you think you can read vibes okay. And it's like we could talk about the ins and outs of dating, even though I've been married for 27 years and, you know, dated her most of the 7 years before that. But I think that it's hard because a lot of times it's up to men to read the signs. Like in this case, the check comes.
Right.
You know, if she grabs for it or says, let's split it, then that's probably sending you one message like, okay, this isn't working out. So she doesn't
Correct.
want any attachment or give anybody any ideas.
Right.
But, you know, it's that's how we get into trouble. I had a friend of mine I used to have lunch with occasionally, and I would just usually pick up the check. And he got offended. And I'm like, why? He goes, you don't have to buy me lunch. I said, I'm not even thinking about that. I said, I go to lunch with people all the time. Sometimes I pay, sometimes they pay. I
always
don't
evens
keep
out.
score.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So there's a sensitivity there. All right.
But
we're-
if she never even made a half-faith effort to say, oh, please, do you mind? Just for him to say, no, I got it. It might be him sending a signal.
I think she does ruffle through her bag to make it seem like she's looking without saying
There you
anything.
go.
Just
You
a
gotta
signal,
go through
but
the dance a little bit.
I agree. I agree.
But hopefully he's a
all part of
listener, and maybe he'll learn his
gotta
mistake.
no, wait. So I don't think we ever got a clear thing. So did she split it?
She did.
Okay.
She did. Yeah.
Lena's like, come on, girl. No.
That's-
no.
It was also like a really expensive place too.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe that's why.
He picked the place. It wasn't like her saying you should go here.
Yeah, that's that.
gotta-
Had
you
she
gotta
picked
be
the
better.
place and it
Gotta
was
be better.
expected,
Right.
All right, expensive. That would have been all right. So let's get back to this.
Wait, so I thought this was some sort of parallel to what we were talking
It
about.
is.
This
Like, so
how are we relating this to the
He's talking about the mixed
to the
signals
jobs
of the
I
report?
say all of that to say if it weren't for this BLS report, rates would be lower. If it weren't for this one moment where he wanted to split the check, things would be a lot
Would've
different
worked,
in their
yeah.
relationship.
Right.
Well, you're two things to counteract what you said.
Please.
Initial claims for unemployment, the latest number went down to a 6-week low.
Yeah, but
The continuing claims were flat. So they did shoot up 2 weeks ago, but last week they were flat. So
keep in mind though, people who have been on benefits for 26 weeks or more fall off.
I get
and it's
that.
still elevated.
And a lot of those Doge workers still are counted as employed because
Right.
they're still getting paid.
Yeah.
They may wind up
When
on
is
those
that
rolls.
8 weeks up? It was 8 weeks.
8 months.
8 months?
8 months.
God
The
bless.
continuing
It ends
claims
in 8 months.
My employees better not be listening to this.
for months and months and months, the continuing claims were under 1.8 million, and then now it's really trending closer to 2 million.
Well, I think
consistently.
in talking some anecdotal, stories with people, friends of mine that are looking for work, it's a lot harder than it was. And we used to say, well, it's getting back to the way it normally was. But I think companies are being more cautious now. The other thing that we found out is job openings went up again at the end of May. Now, that's the end of May. So, take it for what it is.
we do
but-
have our gripes with JOLTS and the way that they do it, but yes, it did go up, but the hiring
The
rate
hiring didn't go up.
went down,
exactly.
which was-
Right,
So I
and
think we
that's the trick. There, we talked before. They're advertising jobs. They're
Not
slow to
hiring.
fill them because they're worried about tariffs.
Exactly.
And we're coming up on the 9th,
Right.
which is the day the pause ends.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's talk of the administration sending out letters saying, "Welcome to our tariff program."
Right.
Since we
Effective
didn't hear
August
back from
1st.
you, now you're going to be hit with that. They claim they have a bunch of. But at last I checked, it's about 100 countries they still got to cut deals with.
Yep.
So it was an interesting article in Bloomberg last week. It's like, so where's the deals?
Right.
And a lot of us like, yeah, we forgot about all that because the stock market went up.
Right.
Who's worried about that?
Yeah, so I think no offense to this report, but I think the importance of it is minimized compared
It's
to
not
what's
a
going on.
It's
in the
not
rest
a
of the
bad
world.
thing. I agree with you, but it's not a bad thing that we're adding jobs at a decent clip, even if they're not the
Being
jobs
filled.
we're looking for, as
Right.
the stormtroopers would say in Star Wars. All right, so in my 4 bullet point summary, hiring still decent, layoffs still low. I mean, I'm sorry for anybody that's lost a job. It's a terrible thing, and it's harder to find a new job, but layoffs are still low. Still a lot of unfilled jobs out there, or at least at the end of May there were. Who knows what's happened in the month plus since then. Wages are still rising much faster than inflation. We'll get CPI later this week. We'll see what they say. And number 4, don't expect rate cuts. And then I mentioned the song on my blog, See You in September. Which
There
is
was
not my favorite
I
September
I
song.
did
but-
think that that there was a better chance that the Fed would drop rates if this report came in under expectations.
In July?
In July. If just based on what the Fed was saying, different Fed members were saying, it seemed like if this was like a really bad report, I thought they might cut, but now that it came in higher, they're probably not.
They're not cutting.
I do have a question though. So the jobs that were created, the state and local education,
Right.
2 things. Number 1, the non-seasonal adjustment was pretty massive, right? It was like negative 524,000 to positive 63,000.
I didn't look at that number. Sorry.
But jobs created in education in May going into the summer, I would think that was
There's
worth
supposed to be
questioning.
seasonal adjustments that take care of it. There's always a summertime, like in New York City, lifeguards get hired,
It
and that
it
jacks
just seemed
up employment.
yeah, it just seemed higher than what you would expect.
We see
going
the
into
holiday
some months.
season, but now nobody goes to stores to buy things, so you don't see that huge surge in holiday hiring.
Yeah.
that you used to. So it takes time for these models to be adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people are worried that with the Doge cuts, or at least the BLS, are not refilling some jobs. Like, is that going to make the numbers more volatile? It's like pretty volatile now.
Right.
Scott Nadler does not approve many times of them. So
Didn't we also talk about how they do these surveys in the middle of these numbers?
it's in the middle of the month.
Yeah.
Well, they got to
So-
tabulate everything. That's the
right.
thing. And the thing about BLS surveys is, at least when I was there, they're voluntary. So you call up companies and ask them for data, and they hang up on you. You can call again and try to ask nicely, but you can't. And it's very nice. Like we used to have to do what we call PVs, or personal visits, sometimes unannounced, if they weren't returning our calls. It's like, hey, I'm with the Department of Labor. The door just slams right in your face.
Imagine you're working, this guy knocks on your door. Hey, do you mind if I just get...
Try doing it to a nursing home, and it's like, you're from the government? Slam. Especially in New York, we have the highest refusal rates in the country. I've been gone for 30 years, so I don't know how bad it is.
So again, it goes to how accurate these numbers really are if people aren't responding.
Well, it's as accurate as they've always been. I think a lot of people say the books are cooked or whatever, or they're not doing this, doing that. They do re-benchmark data. And sometimes, I do market reports. There's a lot of data that comes in after the quarter ends. We revise the numbers every time we do a report, all the prior numbers. Sometimes those revisions are big.
Yeah.
So, it's hard. You get a $60 million sale in a neighborhood that comes in, that closes the day the quarter ends, that we don't know about. That's a huge adjustment to that area's data. So
The Fed rate cut is an important thing, though, because there's not a direct correlation between the Fed rate and mortgage rates, as we've talked about.
as anybody that's ever watched this or listened to the show once would know.
With
'cause we
that
talk
be-
about it every episode.
With that being said, there's a longer term correlation. So as the Fed lowers rates, you don't see mortgage rates drop immediately, but over time it will drop. Now, more recently, as the Fed lowered rates, you saw mortgage rates pop up, but not because the Fed lowered rates. It was because all the data that came in from inflation and jobs drove rates up.
It's a chicken and the egg thing, because if the Fed's lowering rates, that usually means the economy needs a little bit of help, and that would bring rates down. So,
Correct.
some people may say there is a correlation. It tends to follow with a lag. Well, monetary policy also takes 6 months to a year to work anyway.
But from a psychological point of view, the most homeowners and players just see the rates drop and saying, "Oh, things are good now."
Correct.
They don't look at it as they're trying to fix the.
Yeah, it's like they're actually trying to help us.
Yeah.
exactly.
Like by splitting the check.
Right.
All right, we'll be back
guy's
with
great.
some more talks.
That's great.
We're going to introduce you to something called layoff anxiety when we return from these special messages.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Hi, I'm Evan Greenberg with Langdon Title. I specialize in title insurance across New York, helping real estate attorneys, agents, and brokers close with confidence. I solve problems fast and keep your deals moving. Contact me anytime.
And we're back. So, we're talking about hiring and layoffs. There's an article last week about layoff anxiety. I don't know if this is a new thing. I think I always tell people one of the reasons I think I've been successful is I never assume I can't be fired. You don't want to get too comfortable because then that's when you might get lazy and slip up and that. Plus, a lot of times it's just bad luck. You're in an industry that's struggling.
Right.
Real estate was one of those industries.
Scott was saying earlier how he thinks he can sit in that chair and run this podcast.
Of course he can. Would he
Crossing
do it
the
as well
line?
as me? No. But
Crossing the line with Scott Nadler.
No,
doesn't
your
have the
show
same-
would be
the same ring to it.
called like I'm already on the other side of the line, because you'd have to one-up me. It's like Greg's on one side, Scott's on the other side, saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, it's nice over here, buddy.
Exactly.
It's raining on my side, sunny on your side." That's why you
It'll
always
just
can.
be reaction videos to your podcast. This is what Greg got wrong on this week's podcast.
like the revisions to
Yeah,
the PLLC
exactly.
data.
I'll-
It's like, he says, and then if you compare me to the Fed, then I'm really going
Right.
to cry.
Yeah. What is this What does this economist actually know?
So that's a question everybody that tunes in tries to figure out. So a lot of reported job cuts the first 5 months of this year by the aptly named Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. Now, job cuts don't mean that many people are going to necessarily lose jobs or we're going to see that much of a loss of jobs because they may cut in one part and increase in another part. Wall Street rebalances every year. But that's up 80% compared to the first 5 months of the prior year. So it tells us what we kind of know. It's a slowing labor market. So 46% of Americans report feeling, quote, concerned about layoffs in the next year, according to a recent Indeed survey. Indeed, it said that.
Indeed, it did.
That's the best joke I could come. I don't want to make jokes about layoffs. But, this is a thing, I guess, that can cause a lot of anxiety, not just by the title, but where people really start to worry. Am I next? Especially if your company has laid off people. You worry, is my unit okay? Are they going to fire the economist? Because, a guy named John Amarante sang the national anthem at the Garden for decades. And he used to do it at St. John's games. And I met him once, and he couldn't have been a nicer guy. And I said, do you ever get nervous out there when you're singing the national anthem? He goes, no, it's like, saying your prayers and going to bed every night. He goes, but you do worry when the team's not winning. He said, because that's when they replace the guy singing the national anthem. And I think about it, all the decades, they only won once. They only won it, and the Rangers won in '94. The Knicks didn't win in all the time that he was singing the national anthem. But anyway, so signs you have layoff anxiety.
So the first is if you're the Fed chairman, you probably have layoff anxiety.
Well, I don't know if it's a layoff.
You're probably not making it more than one. He's got 1 year left.
But that's maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a job, though, that the moment you leave it,
Right.
your annual salary becomes your per speaking engagement fee.
Yeah.
It's like when presidents either don't get reelected or can't run again, they make $1 million a speech. I don't know what the Fed chairman makes, probably $300,000, something like that. And he'll make that per speech.
Yep.
Right. So I think it's a real thing. When I started doing residential real estate closings, I worked for a small firm. It was one partner, 2 attorneys, me and my partner Todd, and probably 2 or 3 paralegals support staff. And rates were dropping back then, right after the housing crash. And we were basically doing refis all day long, right? We just sat in a room, we did closing at 10, 12, 2, 4 closings. Next day, prepare for files. And every 8 to 12 months, people were coming back doing another refi, right? So rates were 7, 6, 5. And then it got to the point where rates couldn't drop anymore. And the refi boom was done. And all of a sudden we came to work and we had nothing to do. And I was at the firm probably at that time for a year and a half, right? So it was probably the middle of 2009.
So you're the last guy in.
Exactly.
Which
So
is usually the first guy
actually,
out.
and it was an open conversation. I said, what's the business plan here? Because it seems like we just came to work, the phone was ringing with business, and now everything stopped. What's going to happen here? And I remember whatever answer he gave didn't make me feel better. And I said, I need to go out and I need to build my own book of business to try and cover myself. And it took almost 4 or 5 years for me to do that. But, I had to have the foresight to know that you can't always rely on these things. And people may have the anxiety, but you need to get ahead of it.
Well, it's funny because you just covered like all my talking points.
Right.
No, everything you said is exactly. So the signs are, you have a problem focusing, you're always worried, you can't stop thinking about your job and how to manage it, come up with an action plan. You got
to put a black screen over there.
redo your resume, reconnect with people. I always tell people when you lose your job, tell everybody. You may not want to, but you never know that you haven't. Everybody's got a network of people.
It's actually too late. It's too late.
At that point.
Everybody needs to know what you do for a living while you're doing it.
That's a good point.
Right? So
my mother doesn't know what I
daddy,
do for a living, and I've been doing it for 33 years. She's
As
like,
much
"What's
as
an
we
economist?"
joke about the loan daddy, right? But he's like, everybody knows he's
But
in mortgages.
it's annoying after a while, isn't it? Come on.
I had a client a month ago who, right before closing, we need to do a verification of employment, where we call their employer, someone in HR, to verify that they still work there. Now, we don't get the employer's contact information from the client. They want to be like an investigator, to call them and get someone random on the phone to see if they actually still work there. And this client was fired, unfortunately. So we had to, it was 2 weeks before closing, and he tried to pull a fast one on us. He was the nicest guy in the world. He didn't try to do anything nefarious, but he wanted to close. And so naturally that delayed things. We had to add a parent onto the loan. In situations like that, if someone gets an offer and it shows that their start date and they have a salary and a job title, we can lend to them based on that if it's within 90 days of closing. So they can close without actually starting the job, but as long as they have that solidified job offer. Okay. In this case, he didn't have that. So we had to add a parent onto the loan with him. It delayed things. The seller was getting upset. I mean, it was a whole...
You guys should write a book,
Yes.
Called Stuff That Happens Right Before You Close.
We're going to call it just that.
Well, you might not use stuff. You might use a different word.
It would have to be fiction because people wouldn't believe the stuff that,
No,
that comes out.
I had a lot of stuff happen before I closed on my house that was shocking.
Yeah.
The cheapness of people that bought a house 50 years ago for like $40,000 and now selling it for
Millions.
10, 15, 20 times that.
Yeah.
Complaining about not wanting to pay for a termite inspection.
Exactly.
We get that all the time. I was working with maybe 3 years into the business, I was working with a client buying a $5 million place and taking a $4 million loan. And he gets the initial paperwork and he calls me and he goes, $25 for a credit report?
No,
we had a 15-minute conversation about a $25 credit report. I'm like, this is probably why you're so successful, but also like you're wasting all of our time.
So one of the things, it's unbelievable that that's how they think, but you're right, that might be why they're successful. One of the ways I approach that with my clients is if we have a walkthrough issue right before closing, right? So it's $1 million property and you're fighting over a $1,500 repair. And ultimately, the deal you make, both people need to be unhappy for it to work out. But sometimes I'll look, and if you can't bridge that gap, you just look at your client, you say, it's $1 million property. When you were negotiating the price at the beginning of the contract, if they had squeezed you for an extra $1,500 on the purchase price, would you have walked away from the property? Right. And when you put it into perspective, people realize, well, maybe it's not as bad, and it's not the emotions that are running.
It's the same thing that we've talked about when it comes to clients looking at the rate and not the actual payment.
Not the payment, because they're laser focused.
Yeah, they say my rate needs to be under this, but then you look at it, it's like it's an extra $25 a month or $50 a month. So, putting that in that context definitely makes a difference.
But putting aside as an employee, as an employer, now that I run a small firm, 10 or less employees, it's really hard. Being a lawyer is the easy part. It's the business part that's very difficult, trying to navigate whether you staff yourself for when rates are high, when rates are low. Firing people is a really hard thing to do when it's a small firm.
Well, I think too, like if you're running a firm or running a department, your job is to think about the future. Like you have to be the one thinking what comes next, what environment are we heading into, because it's the Who Moved My Cheese. Like we've probably all read that book.
It's a great book.
It's a quick read, but that's the thing. You keep going to the same spot for the cheese every day, and it's not there. You won't know what to do.
Right.
And I, as a department head, I'm always saying, what new analysis reports can we do? What's changing? What do we need to focus on? And I think always trying to improve at what you do as an owner or as an employee is the best insurance against problems in the future.
Absolutely.
Have you seen those videos?
Like
of-
hosting a very successful podcast.
Has it been monetized yet?
Hey,
Are we the monetized?
yeah, by the way, where's the money? Where's
I
the
walked
cash?
right into that one.
No, literally, I want cash under this table right now. No one will know. It'll just be our secret.
I sent
We're
you
sitting on it right now.
Bitcoin. You got Bitcoin.
All right, I'll take it.
Dogecoin.
I'll take it. Just give me 1 Bitcoin. I'm good.
There are
All right,
these
go ahead.
videos online of people who they'll get an email from HR saying that they have a Zoom meeting scheduled, and they'll know that there were layoffs in the company, and they know like this is their time where they're going to get laid off. So they will record the conversation, and then they'll post it online. And some of these conversations are, I mean, from a management perspective, I understand there's like a lot of legal reasons why people do this, but they're oftentimes getting fired by people that they've never met. They don't even know who they are. And they're not being notified by their direct manager or supervisor. And it just leaves such a bad taste in their mouth. And it's these people who are asking questions to someone who can't answer their questions. Like, why am I being
A
let
lot
go?
of times they're working off a script.
And they're 100% working
And
on
they're
the
just
script.
reading off this script.
100%.
And it's bad. And look, I've always told my son, because he's like, what's it like to be a boss? It's like having a child, you know, in certain ways. You never want to punish your kid. And I can't lay my kid off. But, you know, even when somebody has deserved it for a number of reasons, it's a terrible thing to have to do. You're thinking about, and I've talked to people, I have a brother who works in retail his whole life. You know, I was like, when do you fire people? And he goes, first thing in the morning. He goes, I don't want to think about it all day. I had a boss who used to do it at lunchtime. He used to tell him, just go to lunch and go home.
Yeah.
So
It's usually
a competitor,
Fridays, yeah, usually Friday mornings.
exactly, a competitor of ours, I won't say their name.
No,
but
they ain't
there was-
sponsoring the show.
There was a very public firing
They
where
weren't really competitors. You guys crushed them. But go ahead. They're in the same.
sure
In the same business.
they're in the same business. They had a Zoom call with about 75 people, and the owner of the company had like a 20-minute speech about the outlook of the company, their vision, all these great things that the company is about to do. And they ended the call with, so everyone on this call, we have to let you go.
Yeah. If you're on the Zoom call, you've lost
If
your
you're
job.
on this call, you're no longer working in the company.
You're not part of the plan I just laid out.
75 people. And
We're
that
not
whole
going to tell the
conversation-
people still here what's going to happen. But and don't tell them. All right, we got to take a break. And then we're going to talk about some more things, including housing and rates and how much money Scott can lend you as soon as we get back from these messages.
Ultimate Diamond is New York City's most established family-owned jeweler. With over 65 years of experience, Ultimate is renowned for its exceptional, custom-crafted diamond jewelry, its bespoke engagement ring designs, and its ability to source rare, distinguished timepieces. Ultimate has built a legacy of timeless craftsmanship and discretion, making it a trusted name among those who value refined luxury. Learn more at ultimatediamond.com.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Okay, and we're back. All right, we're going to do some quick hits here. So the big, beautiful bill signed, the spending plan. Close votes, but so we're not going to really get into this other than say the big thing is the extension of the 2017 tax cuts. But obviously for real estate, SALT cap, right?
Yep.
SALT cap. So it is increased to $40,000. And that may sound good, but two caveats, because I have to spoil everything around here.
5 years.
Only for 5 years. It goes back 10,000 unless something is done. Sounds like the original thing with the tax cuts anyway. And it starts to phase out once your income's over $500,000. And that would be the people most likely to benefit from this.
Right.
So I get in trouble sometimes by saying that, you know, everybody predicted doom for the real estate market when all of a sudden there's a cap on those deductions. For those of you who live in states where you don't have high income taxes, that's state and local taxes. You used to get to deduct that from your federal income tax if you itemized. And now they basically cut that to $10,000, which is nothing. I mean, I live in Long Island. That doesn't even cover my property taxes, let alone the state taxes I pay.
Absolutely.
So, you know, but at the same time, the standard deductions were raised dramatically. So most people, I think it's almost 90 some odd percent are taking standard deductions now because it's hard to get to that number, particularly if you're married. But you know, maybe it was just because we had such a run of home sales after COVID, but the areas you thought were going to get killed by this, with Long Island, where I live, Westchester, Connecticut, New Jersey, prices have never been higher.
Right.
So you could say, well, it's an inventory issue, but still, people are buying it. Now, do you think, and you can both chime in on this for sure, that this is going to give any boost to the real estate, knowing that maybe you'll get 5 years out of it, depending on your income, you're not even going to get the $40,000? What do you think, Shar? Has anybody called you about this yet?
So nobody's called. This is fresh off the presses, right? We had a long weekend. Nobody's called about this, but I don't think this is really going to move the needle too much. There might be some people who are sort of like on the verge of being able to afford, or maybe you can go into a little bit of a higher, price point. But I don't think this is going to take people who are out of the market into the market. It'll just shift the price point of which they can purchase. But as far as it being expired in 5 years, like we talked about earlier, 5 years from now, we'll be living in a totally different world. So
we could be living on Mars.
Yeah, so I think most people will take what they can. Well, with this, we won't go to Mars. But with, but you sort of take what you can for the 5 years. Let me get the extra salt cap and see where we go from there.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when the 421A program was big in New York. Like people would wait till there was like 2 or 3 years left in the exemption, and then they would sell it. It's like, I got to sell it now. And then we'd always have buyers that would be like, wait, aren't the taxes like going to go up 1,000%? It's like, no, it phases out. But if it's your primary residence, then you get to call up condo payment, which takes a lot of the sting out of it.
Also, think about 2017 when they cut it to 10,000. There was a lot of talk about it for like a week. And then it went away, and people started buying.
5 states.
Right. So I remember having calls with real estate agents and clients and people wanting to rethinking whether or not they're going to buy a place. And again, it really did not last that long. If people need to buy and rates were dropping, and so at that time, it's still dependent upon home values, inventory, interest rates, et cetera.
I'd be curious to know how many people are actually doing the math.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He's going to get a call saying, okay, maybe I can live at the rates I don't necessarily like. Tell me how my taxes are going to change for this year versus, with the standard deduction versus this now. And you're going to like, the tables haven't even come out. Like, what do you want me to tell you?
Speak to your CPA.
Exactly. So that's more of an accountant question. You're right. But most people.
And your accountant's going to say the same thing. We don't have the tables yet. We have no idea what anybody's going to tell us.
So most people, when they're buying a house, they'll call their mortgage person and say, okay, what are my rates going to be? What are my taxes? What are my payments? How much money do I need to bring to the closing after purchase price?
Exactly.
And that's it. I don't think people are looking at the deductions at the end of the year. I think those are just extras for them.
Right.
Okay, so now we're moving on to my favorite subject, the Fed. Now you had mentioned that if it wasn't for the BLS report, rates might have been cut.
Maybe.
Fed Chairman Jerome Powell admitted last week that he would have cut rates already if it wasn't for the tariffs.
Correct.
Okay, and with this pause ending, who knows? But this is what the chairman said. Quote, in effect, and I just love the way these Fed chairmen speak. In effect, we went on hold when we saw the size of the tariffs, and essentially all inflation forecasts for the United States went up materially as a consequence of the tariffs. Now, this goes to the misconception that tariffs cause inflation. They don't. I don't know how many times I could say it. They don't. There's no sign of it yet. Oh, Greg, that's because the stuff was in here before and there's a pause on tariffs. Okay. The items tariff might go up in price, but we've talked ad nauseum about why that doesn't always happen. For example, people are like, I'm not spending $3,000 for an iPhone. There's never going to be such a thing as a $3,000, unless it's like diamond studded or something like that. They're not going to make their iPhones here. They're going to make them there, and they're going to either eat the tariff or pass along some of it, but not all of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people don't get. And I don't know why people think that...
People, do you mean Powell too?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good out for him.
Yeah.
It's like if someone says to you, what's the SALT cap being raised going to do for my payment? You're going to be like, nothing, but you might save this. Well, how much am I going to save?
Right.
So it's good to be able to punt it and say, ask your CPA, or he can say, well, talk to the administration. If they get rid of their tariffs, then we'll do it tomorrow.
Right.
Which isn't a given. Remember, there's no August meeting, so September is the earliest they could do it if they don't do it this month.
Right.
I think it's like a husband and wife bickering. I think it's the administration urging him, saying, hey, it's time to drop rates, and him saying, I would have done it if it wasn't for what you did over here.
Right.
And there doesn't have to be any validity to it because we're in a world where those tariffs are still in limbo and we don't know where they're going to be. And you're right. I think that's his way of saying, don't blame me. We need to wait and see what happens.
Well, because we have a lot of other things to blame him for. You know, the letting inflation get out of control and his $2.1 billion renovation of the Fed's headquarters that he denied was going to have all these private elevators and beehives.
What else grinds your gears?
I mean, come on. No, we joked about it. Like, just when you think I couldn't get madder at the Fed, they find a way to do it. And remember, they're losing billions of dollars in the mortgage bonds that they hold. So, you know, it's bad, but...
Inflation, I think, is still the big driver for him. I mean, it really elevated to a high degree under his watch. And
because he kept calling it transitory because he didn't know what he's talking about.
Of course. So now I think he doesn't want to cut too quickly, so inflation starts to run. He rather the job market get hit a little bit than inflation start to go up.
Well,
again.
he can also say, look, we gave you a percent of cuts last year. Why don't you be happy with that for a while?
Right.
But I think even economists like myself that wanted him to wait, there's room to cut now.
Exactly.
I think that the core numbers are artificially high because the housing data, the way it's collected, the 6-month intervals and the CPI, like I said, we see plenty of signs that housing appreciation is slowing. Inventory is rising. Sales are slow, pretty sluggish.
Right.
All right. So speaking of housing, mortgage rates fell for the 5th straight week. Dun, 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 dun.
But then the BLS numbers came out.
Lowest
would have been a
since
6th straight week.
Don't.
All right, go ahead, Greg. Go ahead. Finish your.
No, I
notes.
was going to rain on the parade before you got a chance. Right? So lowest rate since mid-April.
Yeah.
And that sounds nice, but 5 straight declines, only 22 basis points. So it's not even 1/4%. It's still sitting about 6 2/3.
Yeah.
Now probably higher since the jobs report.
Yeah. So figure for every $100,000 borrowed, that 22 basis points, is $20 a month. So that's what we're talking about. So, with that drop, we've had a lot of clients who've been floating for a while, waiting to see what the right time is to lock it in. And when they've seen rates drop about 1/4%, it's like, do you want to just lock this in, take your savings, or do you want to roll the dice and see if it goes even lower? And most people right now are opting just to lock it in because they're afraid of the uncertainty that they've been seeing.
Well, that's when people always say, should I lock in now or wait? I always say, what's going to upset you more?
Right.
That to me, it's,
Exactly.
And, can you just, it's like if you buy something, don't look online to see if you can get it cheaper somewhere else, things like that. I think it's hard because people want to get it right and you're never going to get it right.
Right. Most people, though, are when they sign a contract and they start the process, they're looking at what their estimated payment is. And now I'm calling you a month later or 6 weeks later and saying now it's lower. So
and they don't say thank you, loan daddy.
They do. They're very, very appreciative clients. But most of them, again, are opting to just lock it in, take the savings, and move on.
Yeah, you want to feel like you got a win out of it, and that's all people want.
Exactly.
Okay, well, as a New York sports fan, that's my feeling every time. I just want to feel.
Oh my God, I was with a really annoying Mets fan the entire weekend.
Okay, that's redundant.
Very, very
really annoying Mets fan. It's like we took 2 games off of LA in the playoffs last year. You only took 1. It's like, it doesn't matter. If you don't win, you don't win. That's what Met fans don't get. It's a good thing Lisa Ray's not on the show this week because she'd be smacking me right now. Lena's giving me dirty looks. I don't know why. I don't know if she's a Met fan.
What are the Mets and beach chairs have in common?
Greg, you want to take this?
Come October, you won't see either of them.
Oh. Hey, look, it's exciting. They're both in the mix. Let's be in this series this weekend. As a Yankee fan, was disgusting to watch. But remember, we got swept by Toronto before that and swept right out of first place. So we weren't too happy before they went to Queens. But it's good that they're both relevant. For forever it was just the Yankees. Then the '80s that shifted over to the Mets. Maybe because of their disgusting off-the-field behavior as much as...
It was a fun team to watch.
It was crazy. And they talk about the Yankees of the 70s being crazy, but you look at the stories There's a documentary on the '86 Mets,
Absolutely.
what they used to do to airplanes and other things.
Dwight Gooden missing the parade.
Well, who doesn't go and overindulge in
finish that
drugs?
sentence.
And, I mean, it's.
But I had a T-shirt which was much more relevant in the early 2000s. It said, "Why is it called the World Series if it's always played in the Bronx?" And if I wear that now, most people won't understand it.
No, and
it is outdated.
There used to be this guy, the sports
Doesn't
guy.
fit me anymore either.
There used to be this guy, the sports guy that wrote on ESPN. Now is Bill Simmons. Now he writes. He did the Yacht Rock documentary. He produced that.
Yeah.
Love that thing.
This guy that I was with, though, is such a diehard Mets fan. He was talking about the difference in the cinematography on SNY versus Yes and how much better it is.
Well, that's all nice, but it's all about winning. But but what
the content is better.
What Bill Simmons used to joke about is, you could say at some point that there was, like right now, there are kids that if you were born after 2009, you haven't seen the Yankees win. Right? When on average over time, they win about every 4 to 5 years when you look at how many champions. So he used to joke about that would get him through. Like if you're this age, you haven't seen the Yankees win a World Series. Forget that you could have lived to be 100 and you wouldn't see a Cubs World Series. But I think that the problem with New York teams, I've said this before, is terrible ownership. The Yankees have had stable ownership a lot of that time, if not a little noisy with Steinbrenner, but he was committed to winning.
Exactly.
And I think the Giants had that a little bit. The Jets, terrible ownership, and obviously the Rangers and Knicks being owned by the same person, that's double bad. And the Mets being Madoff victims. By the way, I hope everybody had a good Bobby Bonilla day. We didn't get a chance to really talk about that. Every year I put in my column, and I always say, and it's right around 4th of July. So this week I said, today we have the latest about the labor market and celebrate one of our favorite holidays. And then I put Bobby Bonilla Day. Again, because they owed Bobby Bonilla, I think, a little less than $6 million in a contract. Instead of just giving him that, they agreed to pay him $1.2 million for 25 years. Why the heck would anybody do that? Their financial advisor said, "You're getting these returns at me. Why not just pay him more?" And their financial advisor was Bernie Madoff.
No way.
That's how it all ties in.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it wasn't bad enough that Fred Wilpon was tied up. Fred got his high school buddy and lifelong friend, Sandy Koufax, into the mix.
Well, as an economist, have you ever analyzed how much that $1 million is worth less every year of that 25 years?
No, because I'm not getting it. That's why I don't. I mean, it's an annuity. Plus, he also gets another, I think, $500,000 payment that allegedly the Orioles contribute some of. But the Mets all started this with Brett Saberhagen for the same reason. They're paying Brett Saberhagen $250,000. So they're paying somewhere between like $1.4 million to like maybe close to $2 million for two guys that haven't been on the roster in 20-something years. Sorry, one last thing. There's another article about how the American dream of home ownership is slipping away from people who are retreating to their parents' homes. My son hasn't left the home yet. He's going to go to college, so I guess I can't expect him to go off on his own. But, the sad number, I guess, for a lot of people, and you hear these numbers, you hear what rates are, and even though it's not historically high, it's much higher than, a lot of us paid. But according to the National Association of Realtors, the typical household would need to spend 45% of their income to afford a median-priced home, which is well above the 30% threshold typically used. Now, do you get that frustration? You both handle people when they're buying homes or trying to buy homes.
By the way, this is like the people who have never seen the Yankees win. It's like some people
they've never seen an affordable
have never seen rates, super low, or like they're hearing stories about it. I mean, look, this is one of the reasons why Mamdani is so popular. He's selling the point that homes are unaffordable. You can't buy a home today. Rates are high and all that. And I'm going to give you a free home. That's part of the appeal, that all these young people are gravitating towards someone like that because they're talking about something that that the young generation doesn't feel that they'll be able to afford. So I think, look, so many people in my world want to talk to me about real estate. And when you hear, the main complaint is rates are too high. I can't afford anything right now. right? So I'm going to continue to rent,
And that makes rents high
and that makes rents high.
because
Exactly.
everybody's renting.
So yeah, it's
Well,
definitely
just do
a
a rent freeze then. Solve that problem.
right, exactly.
Well, I think, it's hard, but I was 36 when I bought my house. You know, it wasn't always you bought a house at 22, 23, your first job. Maybe in places where housing was more affordable. I think I've told the story before. I worked for the federal government out of college, making like $23,000 a year. And then I go to my training and people are saying about the homes they just bought. It's like, did you buy a home, Greg? I'm like, in Long Island on 23,000? No, it's going to take a lot longer than that.
Yeah.
And I think it's never been easy. I think it's a little bit easier on Gen Z because a lot of them can work remotely, so they can buy a home in a more affordable area and not have to live in a major city or very close to a major city. I think the problem is when inventory gets low, it takes a while to get it back to more normalized levels. At the same time, so that brings prices up. Same time, rates go up because inflation is there. Thank you, Federal Reserve. And, they lose hope. But I think situations change. And we could be headed towards one of those turning points now that inflation is slowly, looking a little better each month. And I think they have to remember, in the old days, you borrowed a couple thousand from a relative or and you got your down payment. Down payments now are 6 figures.
Yeah.
It just takes that much time.
Working from home also, to your point, is much easier. And I think parenting styles are also different, where it's like a little bit easier to live with your parents today versus when all of us were growing up. Like you weren't working from home. You weren't ordering Uber Eats. You didn't have all the entertainment at your disposal on your iPad that you can just kind of watch wherever you want. You can kind of be in your own world in your parents' home and let them do the laundry. So there are some comforts there where a lot of people aren't in such a rush to move out.
If you're a commuter, you're not paying $300, $400 for railroads or parking or whatever. So you're saving that money too. And
Right.
and that enables, I have a nephew that does this.
Mm-hmm.
You can work anywhere.
Yeah.
I would say most of my first-time home buyers are more tied into when they're getting married and starting families. I'm not seeing.
So it's need buying.
So I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, and sometimes you need to lower a little bit what neighborhood you're living in, what price point you're buying, and just get into the market. Just stay a little humble, low. Don't waste your money on all those things we talked about a couple shows ago. With ordering in and eating out and Ubers and stuff like that.
Yes, Lena.
Yeah.
No, we were all guilty of that.
The online shopping. We're all guilty of it, but those are
We have our support group meeting after we film this.
But those are comforts of your life that you get used to, but you're not thinking about the big picture from there.
It's a long, college is a little bit easier because it's easier to get student loans than a mortgage.
Right.
But it is something that has to be planned for the earlier. I'm feeling better about my son going to college that I started the 529 right after he was born instead of waiting until he was like a senior going, oh, by the way, I'm like, some things can't work out that easily, especially when, that you're talking about a 6-figure obligation. And for some people, their education's a home. If you're going to go to medical school or law school or something like that, it can cost you a fortune. All right. Well, we're running really late, but I thought we've had a fun time.
It's a common trend with when it's the three of us.
I know. Well, attorneys, they always got to throw that jargon in.
One of us is talking too much, so
I don't know who that could be.
Check the stats. Let us know.
I can't let Lone Daddy talk too much because then he talks about all the fun things he does, and then we all get jealous. He never takes us anywhere. He's just that way. But thank you, Shar and Scott, and Lena and Ray.
Appreciate it.
And what was your friend's name? Talia.
Talia.
Thank you, Talia. Maybe we'll get you and that guy on the show for a little point counterpoint stuff.
She's gonna love you or hate you. Yeah.
Either way, it's going to be great for ratings. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks when I'll have both a Buffalo and a Florida team. Thanks for watching.